Hello and welcome to the Ecomodernist channel live. This week we saw a great victory for nuclear in the Senate, and we have an expert with us, Bret Rampal, who will give us many details on what in the Inflation Reduction Act does to help nuclear energy.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So, chief in the news this week is that we had a new, political bombshell, an Inflation Reduction Act negotiated with Manchin and other Senate Democrats. But so far, it's pretty exciting. Everyone on Twitter is blowing up about it. We're not going to be able to cover all of it. There's a lot going on. There's 4 different nuclear provisions. We're really excited to share with you exactly what's going on in nuclear policy. And thank you, Bret, so much for being our expert today on this subject.
No, my pleasure. And this bill is not, it may have been a bombshell. Of course, it was a surprise to lots of people, myself, that a deal had been reached, so recently. But this bill is really an evolution of over a year and a half of work that staffers and politicians and people like myself in my old job and, elsewhere in DC and around the United States have been working on. And that was the larger sort of reconciliation package along with the Build Back Better Act. These all sort of have transitioned one from another into this. And that's essentially where we're at today. But why you might have seen, Twitter and so many people quite so excited about this is that this is a slimmed down version compared to whoever started with the Reconciliation Act or the Build Back Better Act. But what has survived out of this package almost fully intact is the energy and climate provisions that started in there. Now, and these energy and climate provisions cover many, many different ranges, but there's actually probably more than 4 provisions. There's 2 specific, like what I call the 2 specific nuclear provisions, an existing nuclear power plant tax credit, which is something that folks like myself in my old job have been pushing and saying, in addition to the recently passed civil nuclear credit program, this would be needed to support and ensure, financially struggling existing nuclear power plants maintain on the grid. And so, that provision has passed through. It's actually changed a little bit in positive ways, a little longer than it was. It lasts a little longer than the previous version did, and offers a real opportunity to satisfy what owners, operators, advocates, everyone has been saying would be valuable for financially struggling existing nuclear power plants. So that provision is great. We then also see a provision of $700 million for HALEU access, high-assay, low-enriched uranium, which is one of those very key, if not the key, supply chain issues for the deployment of advanced reactors, including the top-tier advanced reactor demonstration program projects here in the United States. That'd be the Natrium and X-Energy projects in Wyoming and Washington, respectively. So the $700 million in additional funding for HALEU access, it's $500 million for the consortium, $100 million for transport, and $100 million for another thing that escapes me, but it's HALEU related and all related to previously authorized HALEU programs from, this recent trend of great, sort of focus on nuclear legislation. So those 2 provisions are the ones where it's like, hey, nuclear front and center and very specifically about nuclear. But then this bill also is something for nuclear champions or, advocates or, anyone really to kind of applaud, because nuclear for the future of what this bill considers, which is like kind of level setting the clean energy tax credit dynamic, nuclear is a full part of that picture. So there's a clean energy investment tax credit and a clean energy production tax credit. And this bill provides that future nuclear projects built after January 1st, 2025, which is an arguable time frame when we would or would not see advanced nuclear projects first online, and high probability that there aren't going to be many considering online by January 1st, 2025. So this looks towards that future of nuclear deployment and says, hey, you're in the same bucket as everybody else now. Everybody's getting the same structure. Now, that structure in some ways, some might argue it favors one or another. Smaller generators have benefits here. High wage paying wages above the prevailing wage gives incentives in these tax credit structures, which is a thing that's good for nuclear compared to other, generating sources as well. So they have levers, right? And they go up and down. But nuclear energy in this bill for the future and for the future of clean energy tax credits, it's all in the same pool. And I think that's what advocates have been asking for so many years. It put us all together, technology inclusivity, an approach to look at everybody together and try to treat things more evenly. But again, levers within those things always change those factors. So those are the four kind of provisions that I talked about when I was speaking flippantly. But then also there's $250 billion for the Loan Program Office in this bill. There's EV incentives. EV incentives are good for electricity demand, which is good for nuclear demand. And so there's all sorts of stuff to read in here and follow up on and track and everything, and all sorts of changes. But a lot of this stuff is just really, hey, a great opportunity to say, kind of what we've been asking for, the kind of equal treatment we've been looking for, we're starting to see, and it's substantial. So.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's a really great overview, and I'm excited about some of these provisions. And I agree that January 1st, 2025 date might seem a little off, but if you remember, our last AP 1000 of the previous decade build-out is just coming online in 2023. So maybe it's related to that Vogtle 4 coming online so late. I don't know if their investment tax credit was extended or if it's bundled in some way. I've lost track of that myself. It maybe you have an insight there.
Lots of letters and numbers we're going to start throwing at people. But the existing tax credit for nuclear, for advanced nuclear, is 45J in the US code. And 45J essentially is kind of broken in the way the law is written right now, because the law was written with the anticipation that Vogtle or VC Summer and or both would have been online before January 1st, 2021. Now, years ago when that law was written, that was not a faulty assumption to make. Many of us thought by January 1st, 2021, that plant would be online. I know that in 2018, it was changed. Okay. And I remember, because I was, working in, a little bit more policy advocacy back then, of course. And, there were lots of discussions around it. And what the challenge was at that time, people saw that the dates in there might be challenging for Vogtle and Summer, if Summer was even around still in 2018, for Vogtle to make that 2021 date. So there was a lot of discussion. Let's fix this. Let's change this. Let's change this around. Maybe I'm wrong about 2018. Maybe it was the Energy Act of 2020. I don't know. It was while I was doing policy in the last several years. But the way they changed 45J was essentially to give the Secretary of Energy discretion to award the unawarded credits after the dates in this law. Okay, so now what you have with that law was it's essentially just a tax credit, or excuse me, I shouldn't say law, it's a tax credit. That tax credit you just have that tax credit for Vogtle and the AP1000s and whatever, people hoped in those days were going to, come online quickly. But of course, things changed. And the tax credit is actually an exclusionary principle within the new clean energy tax credits. 45J, it's called out as an exclusion to replace it after 2025. So it's like, hey, Vogtle, come online. And then I believe, and I have to check this because I haven't checked this, but I remember checking this in old versions of this legislation, like in the BBB and the reconciliation package. But again, disclaimer, things could have changed. It looks very similar now. In the old versions, by referencing the correct definition of what an advanced reactor or what applies in an advanced reactor, essentially these new credits excluded Vogtle and VC Summer and, AP1, that sort of, because that, of course, is a big deal for people because they didn't want to be like, hey, this is going to get stretched out, the project will take long, or double dipping or double counting, plus the original tax credit in 45J was supposedly sized right for them at the time. So it's, the trials and tribulations of negotiations in Congress over laws and history and tradition, and even short tradition, right? Some people say tradition and they think hundreds of years of Senate tradition, but you pass a law 10 years ago and that creates a tradition around that as well. So, and those are harder to fight than you would necessarily like sometimes. So what you see here is essentially that we had this old tax credit. It's only for Vogtle. It was for 6,000 megawatts, which Vogel's not going to be. It's going to be a third of that. If something comes online before 2025, they now, with this change, could also apply to the 45J tax credit and seek the discretion of the secretary to have the credit awarded to them. My experience, the last couple of secretaries have been pretty amenable to nuclear energy and the topic of nuclear energy. And well, I'll be frank, okay? Like, take the 2,000 away from Vogtle, and you got 4,000 megawatts left, right? I don't think we're talking about 4,000 megawatts of new nuclear before 2025. I wish we were. 4,000 megawatts of new nuclear would be great, great for my business, great for clean energy, great for everybody. I would think, based on timelines, based on everything, because I don't think regulatory processes are the major limit to this whole thing. Of course, they're a challenge, but people got to realize that we're 6 months through 2022, and we're talking about 2.5 years from now. So 4,000 megawatts of new nuclear generation in 2.5 years would be a lot anywhere right now in the world. So I don't think those are the types of things that we're talking about. So we've got this existing tax credit. It's hopefully going to be applied to Vogtle based on discretion of the secretary when Vogtle comes online. If another nuclear project comes online between now and 2025, they could apply for that. It's not as good as the new one that they would get from the Inflation Reduction Act. And so after 2025, I believe they would be taking and moving on to the new one. And there are some projects that I definitely think could be right at that cusp there. There's micro-reactor projects. I've been saying for years that we want to deploy in the 2024, 2025 timeframe and everything. So these are timeframes to talk about. But again, I don't think it's more than 4 gigawatts. I don't think I think we've got structures that are very, very interesting to look at for the opportunities for nuclear. And then the other provisions in this bill are kind of like throwing that bone back to the solar and the wind and all those other communities that people have been, unfortunately, the general populace, likes a lot better. Public perception and whatnot is a thing, unfortunately. And so that's how we end up with these kind of tax structures transitioning or overlapping.
We would have to be incredibly creative in order to fulfill that other 4,000 megawatts. That would be if I'm going to be a mad scientist, I'm going to say we're going to resurrect Palisades and count that as a quote unquote new reactor. Probably a lot of things made your brain twitch right now. I don't know if that would qualify.
No, that's good thinking, but unfortunately, it would not qualify because the 45J includes a provision, I believe, that says anybody who applies for it has to have been certified or licensed by the NRC after 1993. So we'd have to license or certify a new reactor design and build a new reactor at Palisades, or use a reactor design that's been certified since 1993 and license it and build it at Palisades in 2.5 years.
Yeah, I don't even think China can do that. It's a very, very short time frame, and maybe, but probably not. Like you say, this is the 45J is for new nuclear. As well, the Inflation Reduction Act provisions are for new nuclear, and those are really exciting. We're going to hopefully get, let's see, it's about 320 megawatts in Washington, maybe 300 in Washington, another 300 or so, maybe 330.
The X-Energy project, I believe, is in a 4-pack of 80 megawatt reactors, the XE100 reactors. And then the Wyoming project is, I believe, a 345 megawatt Natrium reactor. Yeah. But of course, that has that, salt storage system that could boost the reactor output to 500 megawatts for several hours a day. So yeah, those are the flexibility goals, options of these new projects. And those projects are targeted for 2027 and 2028, I believe. And of course, I would love to see those projects hit their targets and dates and, price estimates and all that stuff and whatnot. But more in history than not, we've seen delays rather than early completions and speeds to completion. So again, this 2025 timeline supports them. Now, one of these tax credits is an investment tax credit. So I'm sure with the right structures and flexibly done, and I'm not work for investment companies, but I'm not an investment expert, like I'm the technical expert at investment companies. But, I'm sure with the right investment and financing structure, if done right and earlier, and the investment tax credit was earlier, one of these projects might be able to have pursued an investment tax credit. And there is no currently an investment tax credit like 45J, because 45J is a production credit. So we have 3 things. We didn't have an analogous 4th thing to match what we're getting in the new pack. So, there might be an argument someone might make there that there isn't a gap on investment, but that gap I still think would be small in terms of this tax credit coverage.
What is it going to take to keep these projects, the Natrium and the XE100? These are things that I'm actively going to be advocating for and working with constituencies, hopefully, on. What do you think is the real key to making sure that these projects move forward and we don't run into any strange surprises?
The supply chain issues are going to be the biggest thing in terms of seeing these plants successful, in my opinion. They certainly have a lot of great opportunities to be successful, but there certainly are a lot of challenges as well. Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program funding for these 2 projects also includes funding for their first fuel fabrication facilities. So they are getting money to build fuel fabrication facilities that they need to have first before they even have the ability to fuel their reactors and, move on with the opportunities for demonstration of commercial power generation. Now, that's a huge supply chain activity, and that's great. And I'm super happy that was worked into these advanced reactor demonstration proposals and everything, and that the winners were ones that were chosen that had that in. And I'm super biased. Fuel is a huge deal. There's going to be bigger other deals. People talk about factory construction of these things and Are they going to build factories? And looking at timelines, that, like I said, they're building a fuel fabrication factory. And so what other factories and facilities do they need to leverage? Or are they going to need to procure? Or are they going to need to create first of a kind facilities? Probably less of the latter, because I would assume they would have leveraged as much of that into the ARDP proposals, unless they're less risky proposals. Because I know that X Energy and TerraPower already have fantastic research and development facilities and labs. And I think, Carl, I believe you live in Seattle and you're very close to those labs and everything.
There's definitely like the lab facility that we saw in the movie The New Fire connected to TerraPower, the Natrium reactor. And so that I think is in Bellevue, but I haven't visited it personally, so maybe I'm wrong.
The New Fire, fantastic movie, but a little bit old now. So I'm pretty sure they've expanded and added more facilities. These supply chain challenges are going to be big on the front end to see things done correctly. That's why we're seeing so much focus on HALEU right now at congressional and at industry levels. And then we're also going to see a lot of focus on the back end of the fuel cycle. And in many designs, the interim storage is incorporated into the design of the facility right now, especially for a US built plant. And for many, incorporating that might be as easy as, this is a pad that will be built where we will store casks after they are removed from the pools, right? Okay.
Right.
And that is what is used as the interim storage plans in the design for the licensing purposes. And because a lot of these designers, developers of advanced reactor want to reduce the site size and the protected boundary. So you need to license everything on those facilities. So that's why we're thinking about this now, even though we haven't built any of these facilities yet, which is great that we're thinking about it now. But they're doing that because the overall responsibility and what should be done to handle the back end of waste challenges, at least in the United States, that responsibility has been dropped by the federal government. And that is a political nightmare that has created social difficulties and challenges for nuclear energy, but is not something that is not trying to be addressed. And disclaimer, I'm a consultant for this company. We just saw Deep Isolation and Oklo receive numerous different awards for looking at recycling for nuclear fuel and canister packaging for the waste coming out of the recycling process or the reprocessing process. And that's great research that needs to be done. And it's a great opportunity to look at more options for pursuing long-term nuclear waste management, responsible nuclear waste management, all that. It's a 700-page bill. And when I saw the old nuclear stuff that I was tracking, I just got excited.
Great. So we've had a wonderful conversation. So thanks for showing up. Please check us out at esna.earth. And we could definitely use your support. We're filing for a 501c3. The easy form is going to be very easy on us, hopefully next week. We're going to keep on going and growing with your support. So check us out, and you can donate to us at esna.earth. As well, we are on YouTube at the Ecomodernist channel and on Twitch at Soyaddle. Thank you all so much for showing up, and thank you for your expertise again, Bret. Thanks so much for your time.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Please subscribe to us on YouTube, Ecomodernist channel. Also to subscribe to us on Twitter and Facebook, Ecomodernist Society of North America.
And online at https://esna.earth.